Alexander the Great is suspected of having it. Benjamin Franklin suffered through 6-week attacks of it, and King Henry VIII had it so severely, the condition became a permanent part of his historical identity. For most of recorded medical history, stretching back 3,000 years, this agonizing joint pain was treated as a moral verdict. Doctors, philosophers, and the public believed it was a direct punishment for wealth, wine, and self-indulgence, handed down specifically to men who were rich enough to eat and drink too much. The true cause of this suffering was never a moral curse. It was a physical, microscopic crystal, a tangible substance present in the joint even as the world blamed the patient's character. This animated diagram shows a bloodstream breaking down purines, molecules found naturally in our own cells, but also concentrated heavily in red meat, certain seafood, and alcohol. As the body processes these purines, they convert into a byproduct called uric acid, which circulates freely in the blood. When that uric acid concentration exceeds what the blood can actually keep dissolved, it crystallizes. These molecules preferentially settle in cooler peripheral joints, where blood flow and temperature drops slightly lower than the body's core. Most notoriously, they collect at the base of the big toe. The classic gout attack, historically called podagra, happens right here. At the microscopic level, these crystals are physically sharp. The body's immune system recognizes them as foreign invaders and sends an influx of white blood cells to engulf them. The intense joint pain, swelling, and redness occur because the immune system aggressively attacks these microscopic needles, but completely fails to digest them. Understanding this specific biochemical chain of events explains the sudden, severe symptoms completely. It requires no moral judgments about gluttony to understand why a joint filled with microscopic needles hurts. In the 5th century BCE, Hippocrates accurately recorded the demographics of the disease. He noticed that it struck wealthy men frequently, while remarkably sparing prepubescent boys, eunuchs, and premenopausal women. Hippocrates attributed this to an imbalance of the body's 4 humors, believing corrupted fluids were literally dropping into the foot. While the underlying biology was entirely wrong, his demographic pattern was perfectly accurate. Estrogen promotes uric acid excretion, and testosterone does not. Combined with the fact that only the wealthy could regularly afford meat and alcohol, they disproportionately developed the disease. This demographic reality sustained the moral framing for centuries. Even in 1780, while suffering a debilitating attack, Benjamin Franklin wrote a satirical dialogue where he fully accepted the pain as a direct consequence of his sedentary habits and heady diet. Around the same era, English physician Thomas Sydenham formalized the clinical description of the disease based on his own 34 years of suffering. But his rigorous skepticism of contemporary medicines led him to reject colchicine, an effective anti-inflammatory derived from the crocus flower. His personal judgment pushed a helpful treatment out of mainstream use for nearly a century and a half. For over 2 millennia, physicians were caught in a correlation trap. Because wealthy men eating meat really did get gout more often, doctors possessed a mountain of confirming evidence that blinded them from looking for an actual physical cause. The break in that trap came from outside the medical establishment. In 1679, Antony van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch draper and self-taught lens grinder with 0 formal medical training, he took chalky material extracted from a gout sufferer's swollen joint and placed it under his handmade microscope. He expected to see shapeless chalk. Instead, he found, in his own words, long, transparent little particles, many pointed at both ends. It was the first purely observational proof of monosodium urate crystals. 169 years later, London physician Alfred Baring Garrett developed a remarkably simple bedside experiment. As this diagram illustrates, Garrett would dip a thin thread into a patient's blood serum. If the patient was suffering an acute gout attack, he could watch uric acid crystallize visibly along the string. Patients with other types of joint pain showed nothing. Garrett's thread test provided the definitive biochemical marker. It proved with extractable, reproducible data that an actual physical substance in the blood, rather than a moral failing, was causing the condition. Even with the cause identified, a dedicated treatment took another century, and it arrived completely by accident. In the 1950s, biochemists Gertrude Elion and George Hitchings were working on a drug for childhood leukemia. Their problem was that the human body was breaking down their cancer drug too quickly. To look closer at their solution, we can see this molecular flowchart. The researchers identified that an enzyme called xanthine oxidase was responsible for breaking down their leukemia medication. They decided to synthesize a new compound, allopurinol, to act as a chemical wall and block that specific enzyme. As the flowchart updates, notice what happens downstream. It turns out that xanthine oxidase is the exact same enzyme responsible for the final chemical step of breaking down purines into uric acid. By building a wall to protect their cancer drug, they inadvertently flipped a biological off switch for uric acid production. By the early 1960s, clinical tests confirmed that allopurinol safely and dramatically lowered uric acid levels in gout patients. This serendipitous drug discovery eventually earned Elion and Hitchings the Nobel Prize in Medicine. After 3 millennia of recorded suffering, it took a cancer research side project to finally deliver a treatment, aimed directly at the physical root of the disease. Today, the disease of King's nickname is a linguistic fossil. Rising rates of obesity, sugary beverages, and processed meat consumption have inverted the ancient demographics, making the condition increasingly common across all income levels in industrialized countries. Gout illustrates how a perfectly accurate demographic pattern can sustain a completely wrong conclusion for thousands of years. It took a draper's lens, a piece of string, and a cancer researcher's side project to finally solve the puzzle. We look for the physical evidence that finally replaces historical myth. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.